This conference will now be recorded.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the March monthly PI coordinator call. As you all know, we are doing a mandatory training on our most recent protocol amendment and a couple other mandatory trainings that the Central IRB required at the time of our last continuing review. So this call is going to be recorded. If you are a PI and your coordinator is not here or did not come on Tuesday, make sure that they watch the recording. If you're a coordinator and your PI is not here or was not here on Tuesday, make sure they watch the recording. Josh is taking attendance on this call and the prior call, and will be tracking you down if you haven't been on the attendance sheet to add your name to the training log once you've watched the recording. Next slide. We'll talk a little bit about study progress in terms of recruitment and retention. I'll give you a couple general study updates, and then we're going to focus the meat of our call today on Protocol Amendment 8.0 and some new processes for recording and uploading deviation logs and the informed consent process. Next slide. So we just surpassed our 50% recruitment target. We have 219 patients randomized at the end of February, so we are more than halfway to our goal of 425. 34 sites have recruited at least one patient. 8 sites have not recruited a patient yet, of which 3 sites now are in the process of deactivating, and we're hoping to jumpstart the others shortly. Children's Hospital of the King's Daughter and Cincinnati Children's continue to be neck and neck with 18 and 17 participants respectively, which is great. And Emory randomized 3 patients in February, including 2 patients from the same provider on the same day, which is also worth a shout out. Next slide. These are all of the centers that enrolled patients in February. Again, Emory, Cincinnati, King's Daughter, but also Nebraska, Boston, Children's, Levine, and Michigan. Next slide. So the blue line shows our current recruitment and the number of randomized patients over time. And as you can see, for the last year to 18 months, we've been at a fairly steady trajectory of about 9 patients per month. So at the rate we're going, we have about another 2 years to recruit. Next slide. Just a couple general study updates. The Spring Improved Care Now Community Conference will be in Dallas on the Saturday of that weekend. We will be having a combined lunch. Please register for both the community conference if you're able to attend, and indicate whether you'll be attending our combined lunch as well. And secondly, just a quick note, the expiration date for methotrexate and placebos had previously been listed as the end of February, but for those pills, it has been extended to the end of June. So the pharmacy, I believe, has communicated all of this to patients and families. If by chance you all at the sites get a question about expiration dates for medications, you can always refer patients back to the pharmacy or to us at UNC. But just so you know, if there's a specific question about pills that were maybe due to expire in February, that shelf life has been extended through June. Next slide. Janine, our study monitor, is in the process of organizing remote monitoring visits. Every site will be monitored at least once during the study and again at the time of study closeout. These monitoring visits are meant to be helpful and constructive and not overly burdensome. Janine will be sending out some pre-work or homework for sites prior to the monitoring visits. and hopefully all should go smoothly. If there are any issues or concerns with the monitoring visit, just reach out to me personally. Send me an email, but I do anticipate that these will be relatively painless and hopefully helpful to our sites. A word about the blood sample sub-study that Phil Miner at Cincinnati Children's is conducting. And this is the sample that you take at either visit 3 or visit 4 and mail over to his lab at Cincinnati Children's. That study was powered to require samples on 141 patients, and to date they have received 123 samples. So we'll stop collecting the visit 3-4 sample to be sent to Dr. Miner's lab shortly, probably in about 2 months or so. We'll let you all know when that happens. And this is only for the 4 mil EDTA tube that you're sending to Cincinnati. The blood work that you send to the Central Biobank at UNC will be unchanged, both at the visit 3-4 interval as well as in the second year at visit 9-10. Next slide. All right, protocol updates. Let's keep going, Josh. We mentioned on the last call the protocol version 8 was approved by the Central IRB on January 26th. We'll be sending all sites a full copy of this for review, and the signature page will need to be signed and returned by the PI. The reason that we haven't done this sooner is that for each of the sites that are relying on the Cincinnati Children's Central IRB, which is all of us on the call, the site-specific reliance protocols are in the process of being updated now. So the Central IRB approved Protocol 8 that we're going to talk about today, but none of the sites are able to implement that quite yet. We hope the go live for that will be in a couple of weeks. Next slide. The main change with Protocol 8 is that the follow-up period will range from what was previously a fixed 24-month follow-up period to anywhere between 12 months and 36 months. So as shown on the diagram here, we think that most of our patients will probably be followed for right around, if not exactly 24 months. But some patients may have a little bit less and some patients may have a little bit more follow-up. And there's a couple of reasons why we made this change. Next slide. Most importantly is that it will allow us to recruit longer. Essentially, if the minimum follow-up is 12 months, then we can continue to recruit until 1 year prior to the study funding ending. Previously, with 2 years of scheduled follow-up, we would need to stop recruiting 2 years before the funding ends. And so this will allow us to recruit a little bit longer and get every last patient so that we can get as close to our goal of 425 patients as possible. This also allows longer follow-up for some patients, follow-up even more than 2 years, which is important given that pediatric Crohn's is a chronic condition, and the more long-term follow-up data we have, the better. Next slide. In that third year, it should be a relatively easy year from the site perspective. There will be quarterly visits that are exactly the same as the quarterly visits during the second year. We won't be collecting or shipping biosamples during year 3, so you can scratch that off the list. We'll be doing PRO collection only at one point during year 3, so that will make your work at the sites even easier. And we'll continue to pay sites for all of the visits during the third year. It's going to take us a while to process contract amendments to handle the third year of payments, but they'll all be retroactive. So as you have patients who are continuing on to a third year, we will reimburse you for that. I think you all know that the hardest work of this study is everything that happens prior to consent and randomization. And so the fact that they were able to add an additional third year of relatively easy visits will help to further compensate sites for their hard work in patient identification and recruitment. Next slide. In terms of consent issues, our new consents will be updated to account for this variable period of follow-up ranging from 12 months to a maximum of 3 years, with the study ending at the time that our funding ends. So each patient will have a sort of different amount of follow-up. Parenthetically, that's all fine from a statistics side of things because we are doing a time to event analysis. We have a number of patients, over 200 to be exact, who have already signed a consent to participate in a 2-year study. Some of those patients have already completed their 2 years of follow-up, and other patients will be completing that 2 years of follow-up in the next year or two. It is optional for sites and optional for patients to continue on for that third year, and you can reconsent patients who are doing well to continue into that third year of optional follow-up. We will continue to supply them with study medication. They'll get an additional 4 shipments of study medication during that third year. And this optional third year is only for patients who are doing well, still on treatment, who haven't met one of our study outcomes. For patients who have already met a primary endpoint and they're now sort of off treatment, they'll exit the study at the planned 2-year mark. Next slide. A little bit about the unblinding. So for the patients who were consented to the 24-month study, I'm at the third bullet point first. For the patients that consented to the 24-month study, again, which is the 200 plus patients that have already been consented and randomized, if those patients don't want to continue follow-up, they will be unblinded at the end of 24 months. So the patients and providers and docs can use that information about their assigned treatment and combine to decide whether they want to continue on methotrexate or not. For patients who are consented with the new consent, for the variable follow-up, we will be able to unblind them either at the time the study closes, which will depend on how long our funding lasts, or we will unblind them when they reach the 156-week or end of the 3-year study period. Next slide. I'm going to stop there for a minute and see if there are any questions at all about the change in follow-up period from 2 years to this more variable follow-up before I move on. So feel free to unmute and comment or ask a question, or you can put it into the chat box as well. And I'm going to open my chat box so I can see anything that you all type in. This is a big group. I can't believe that no one has clarifying questions or comments.
I think people may be just taking this in and thinking about it and may have some questions later on. So I think one thing that Mike suggested about reaching out later on will be critically important.
Yes, you all know where to find us. All right. Well, I will move on, but if you have any questions about the first part of the protocol amendment, type them into the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end of the call. And we should have about 10 minutes at the end of the call as well for questions as well. Protocol Amendment 8 also added in some clarification and flexibility about collecting the PROs. And we explicitly added in language that the PROs can be collected either in person or obtained by email, US mail, or fax as needed. And so if it's a patient who's having a study visit at a satellite location and the coordinator wants to mail the PRO form, that's fine. If the patient is having a study visit and the coordinator is sick and wants to catch up by email, that's fine. However you want to collect it is great. And I've got a note here that don't hold on to these forms. As soon as you collect them, send them into our PRO Data Coordinating Center at CHOP. They are continuously tracking whether or not we have PRO forms according to when patients are due for visits. You'll be hearing from Jen Clegg if she's missing a form that she thinks she should have. It will save Jen a lot of time and your site a lot of time if you send the PRO forms in as soon as you collect them. Next slide. Protocol deviations. Anne, I will pass the torch over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone, for coming in. These next topics here, protocol deviations and the informed consent process, were both required by the central IRB that we educate everyone on these issues. These tended to be the two largest problems that the IRB was able to identify. So now we are trying to do our best to fix everything. So, Josh, next slide. So we're going to be changing the process of what we're doing with our protocol deviations. This is mostly going to focus in on minor protocol deviations. We have the definitions here as far as that it's a deviation is any type of change, divergence, or departure from the approved study design or procedures of the research protocol. They tend to be accidental or unintentional changes, and they do have the possibility of affecting participant safety rights, welfare, and the accuracy and completeness of our data. We are going to be reviewing these monthly as required. So we will be able to catch any type of reportable protocol violations. Minor deviations are only submitted to the IRB at the end of the year during continuing review, but it's our duty to report any protocol violations as soon as we're aware of them. So next slide. So the deviation logs themselves have been modified. We've added a couple of columns here. So as you note down at the bottom, we're adding in dates, so the date of the deviation, the date that it was added to the log. We're adding in deviation categories and codes, and how we are dealing with re-education for each one of the deviations. Let me give you some more information specifically about category and codes. I think that's the next slide. We'll talk more about the deviation logs. So as I mentioned before, the central IRB now requires that we review everyone's log monthly. Even if it's blank, we need to be able to check off the fact that we reviewed a blank log. So everyone needs to review and record the deviations as soon as you know about them, although no later than monthly. So it's really easy to, as soon as you find something that didn't go quite right, add it to the log. It's a really quick and easy process, much easier to do it as soon as it's discovered rather than finding it later or trying to remember to input it later. And then all protocol deviations need to be adequately documented in the study records. So if you want to add a note to file, if you want to add pointers to where something happened, that's all essential information. Next slide. Okay, for right now, we're looking into different options on where to upload. But for right now, we're going to ask you to upload these to the ICN portal, and you access it from here. And the address is on the slide as well. And so it should be uploaded to your site folder on SharePoint monthly. It needs to have a current date stamp. So we'll be checking for that, and hopefully we won't have to bother too many people. If you just get into the habit of downloading it and then re-uploading it every month, then you're golden. Next slide. Yeah, so this is actually what the SharePoint team page looks like. If you haven't been out here, if you don't know how to get to it, if you haven't used it, please email me. I'd be happy to walk you through. We can share screens, and I can show you how to get to it. Right now, everyone has the new deviation log in this folder, in their team folder. So feel free after the call to download it, take a look at it, and see what it consists of. Next slide. Now we're going to be talking about the categories and codes that we're going to ask you to put in. So the categories here. And as you can see over on the right-hand side, these are the number of deviations that have already been reported as of this past year. So we had 48 issues with informed consent, 18 with eligibility, 74 deviations were reported for the protocol implementation, 3 were with reporting, and we were able to fit everything nicely into the categories. So let's go a little bit into what these codes are now. So each of the categories will have their own codes. You'll see on deviations that in your new deviation log, we put in all the categories and codes this past year when it was submitted. So you'll get a chance to see how your current or past deviations were put through. But it's pretty self-explanatory. There's going to be a couple of codes that you're not going to use, and those are marked on the log itself too. You're going to notice 2 tabs on the log. The first tab is going to be your deviation categories and codes, and it will have all of this information on that page for you. So you just need to click over to that tab, look at the codes, decide which one you want to use, and then input that into the log. So for informed consent, you can see that most of our issues were with code number 6, where the consent form was not properly signed and dated, and then a couple of some of the other issues that we were having as well. Next slide. In the eligibility category, most of the previous deviations were randomized outside the window. Hopefully, with the amendment that went through last year, these windows are now contiguous, so that there should no longer be any gaps. Those are the visits. Sorry, randomized outside the window is if it was randomized outside either 35 days as previously or 42 days as it is now. The protocol implementation And so what I was thinking here was a code number 19, where we had 21 deviations where a participant was seen outside the visit window. Again, those visit windows have now been all closed, so we probably won't be seeing any new deviations for this. Another extremely common one that is outside everyone's venue is that the participant missed the visit. So I think many people don't realize that this is a reportable deviation. So please ensure that anytime a patient misses their visit, that you record that on your deviation log. Next slide. Reporting deviation codes. This is ours have had to do with disclosure or breach of protected health information. So hopefully, again, with the trainings that we've had with the PHI and just our own knowledge, that those will start to go down also. We won't have many new ones. And then finally, we just have, if we cannot find a place to put anything else, then we have an other category. Let me go into and show you a few examples that we have here. So on this one, an incorrect consent version was used. So you're going to go into the informed consent category. So you're going to list that as category A. And then it explicitly says that it was a wrong version that was used. So you're going to use code 2 and categorize it that way. If you have any questions about any of the codes as you're trying to assign them, feel free to email me at any time and we can talk it through or do your best, use your best guess. And then when we are reviewing them monthly and we change anything, we'll let you know of that change. Next example is another common occurrence is if a PRO was not completed. This has to do with the protocol implementation, and so you're going to choose category C, and it falls under missing data, and so you just use code 17. I think it's hopefully pretty easy, self-explanatory, but again, if you have any questions, just feel free to call or email. Does anyone have any questions right now about the deviation logs?
It's pretty loose protocol, so.
Yep. And so just go ahead and type in a message if you have any questions. We'll take care of it from there. The next section that the IRB required us to talk about is the informed consent update and review. So as you could see, that was our major issue, the majority issue, the largest issue of our deviations. So we just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. The current consent documents, these are all the dates. They were sent out in December. And so ensure that your IRB approval date is November 27th. Your expiration date should be the 26th. And just please double check your files. Remove anything that does not have these dates on it. Tear them up, recycle, and ensure that what you have available only has these dates. Now, as we mentioned, we have new consents that are going to be coming out. They should be coming out within the next month. So that will be the time to go through and remove all of the November 27th, November 26th dates, and add your new consent forms once you receive them. Next slide. So these are the most common consenting deviations. So there were quite a few where people were using an outdated, incorrect version of the consent or permission form. It's very, very easy to have multiple files. You're printing off the consent forms, you're sticking them in the file on the desk, and someone comes up and you're grabbing, you're going into your consent file and pulling out what you have there. That's really difficult. Please double check your dates at all times to ensure that you're using the most current ones. There are some issues with signature date discrepancies. So the dates differed between the consent and the assent forms. That shouldn't happen. Everything should have occurred on the same date. Notes written on informed consent documents are not permitted. If you have someone who is taking notes on the consent, that's great, that's fine. That will be their copy to keep, but ensure that they actually sign a clean copy of the consent, and that's the one that will be the official consent. And also please ensure that you have confirmation of the legally authorized representative. We've had some issues where we've had a power of attorney, but they weren't the legal representative sign. We've had step parents sign when the biological parents didn't sign. And so just ensure that that they are legally authorized to consent. And then our next one is that signature blocks were completed incorrectly. So we found a way to fix that and try to make it as comfortable as possible. On the next slide, we should have our new signature blocks. So this is what's going to be showing up on the signature page of the new consents that are coming out soon. So we just wanted to be very, very clear as to who signs where. If something is signed in the wrong place, please cross it off and date it, initial it, and have them add it to the correct place. But you're going to see that we have a printed name of the research participant, signature of an adult research participant, the printed name of the LAR or the guardian, and then we're going to have the printed name of the person who's obtaining the consent and the signature of the person obtaining the consent. Next slide. So on the informed consent process note, this is very important. This is part of the informed consent. You must include the process note when you upload to the consent management system. And if you don't have a copy of this note, please email me. We'll be sure to get it to you. And of course, it's on the SharePoint site as well. Next slide. Remote consenting is another thing that I receive questions about often, and we also have standard operating procedures on how to work with this. So this is all based off the SOP 41 1.6. Please ensure that your patients and parents have a complete copy of the consent form. The consent discussion should take place directly with the individual, so don't do it by email. Everything should be done by telephone, by conference call, video conference, but this is a conversation that at least two of you and more should be having together with the family. So please note also that if the site PI or study coordinator, if you've discussed the study during a clinic visit or even during multiple visits, this does not constitute informed consent. So informed consent is a sit down, let's talk it through, each piece of the consent form and the assent form, and then answering questions going back and forth. The site PI and study coordinator must review the entire consent form with the parent patient in order to qualify as informed consent. And the dates, signs and dates the consent form on the appropriate line. Then, once that happens, we'll go to the next slide. So the participant or the parent will transfer a copy of the entire signed and dated document, not just the signature page. It has to be the entire consent. And the person authorized to obtain the consent signs and dates the form on their appropriate line. And then the method process used to obtain the consent assent is documented on the signature page of the consent form, as well as the informed consent progress note. So you'll just write on the last page that the consent assent was obtained remotely, and just sign and date it. It was done at this time, and so put your information there. Next up. And that is the end of those two pieces. I'm seeing some questions here in the consent in the chat box. Let me see if I can answer some. Will we have to enter the codes for the previous deviations that were noted on the old form? No, those have already been done for you. So when you go into your team page and download your deviation log, they will include the codes that were submitted. We had to code everything. I think we've gone through 3 continuing reviews so far. So we coded and categorized everything that has already been submitted. And that's what you'll have on your new logs. Should one deviation log be accumulative, or do we make a new one each month? Deviation logs are cumulative. So you should have one log that is going to contain everything since the beginning of the study. And that is what we submit every year at the continuing review. So please keep one continuous log and just add to it. I see Josh answered for me there. Good job. If we have missed visit that a PRO should have been collected, two deviations would have occurred, correct? Yes. You would have one deviation for a missed visit and then one deviation for a missed PRO. I think blocking each signature section would make it easier to understand as well. That's a great idea. I will pass that on to Stephanie and see if that's something that we're able to do. I know that she's working on updating everyone's consent forms right now, and hopefully that those should be submitted anytime. But I'll talk to her today with a suggestion. So thank you for that. Any other questions?
Hey, Anne, it's Amy at CHKD. I have a question.
Okay.
When the new consent arrives, will we reconsent any active subject or only subjects who are going to extend for the additional period?
It's only for the people that are going to extend for the additional period. So all new patients will use all new randomizations will occur with the new consents. Mm-hmm. And then only at the time of year 2, when you have someone who consented on the old one, then you would have them reconsent on the new one if they agree to continue for the 3rd year.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So just to clarify, if they agree to reconsent, they will be re-randomized?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. They're just reconsenting.
Just reconsenting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be clear, the conversation will essentially be, you're approaching the end of your 2 years. You're doing fantastic. We have a ability to extend for an additional year. Everything will remain the same. You'll continue to get the same medication that you're getting from the central pharmacy. If you'd like to continue your participation for another year, that would be great.
Any other questions?
I have a question which is not totally related to this. This is Shazad.
Yep.
I know, Mike, that the team has been doing some interim assessments and stuff. Would it be feasible to look at any preliminary data before the end of the study, or sharing of that information at one of the community conferences in future, or do we need to wait till the end of the study to have some information?
Every 6 months, our Data Safety and Monitoring Board meets, and we generate preliminary data reports for them. They are largely focused on recruitment and safety. All of us are blinded in terms of treatment assignment, but if there was a major safety signal that they were concerned about, they would have the power and authority to stop the study.
Okay.
We have planned a preliminary analysis for effectiveness after a certain number of patients meets a primary study endpoint. And we're not quite there yet, but that's why we're working with all of the sites to sign off on the endpoints that have happened in patients at their sites, so that we know when we get to that mark, we can do our preliminary analysis.
So that's really critically important from the sites to recognize that that the data fidelity and then the completion of logs and everything that we talked about today is really important, so to get us to that stage as well.
Yes, thank you for reinforcing.
So again, I just want to reinforce also that send an email, call me on the phone if you ever have any questions about anything. If you want to verify that you're using the correct dated consent form or assent form, I can look that up for you. So we're here to help make your job as easy as possible. Mike, over to you.
I think that takes us through our agenda. So I will not be at the community conference. It is our kids' spring break, but we hope Anne and the rest of our team hope to see as many of you as possible later this month. And we'll resume our monthly PI coordinator webinars next month. And next month will be a standard 30-minute meeting. Thanks all, and happy recruiting and following.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.